Hello, welcome to the Week 10 edition of Talking Underdog Fantasy, drafting some battle royales. How are we all doing? I am down here in not so sunny Florida. We've got another hurricane turned into a tropical storm. Not too bad, but hopefully we don't lose power during the stream. All right, we're gonna mix things up a little this week. Today I think we're gonna start doing as a more formal process is look into last week's contest first. So we'll take a look at kind of how the winner did, how I did, kind of talk through that, maybe anything we learned there. And then we can kind of start shifting forward to like, hey, how do we get prepped for this week's draft? And we'll jump into a few of those as well. So I'm excited for this new format. I think it will work out really well. If there's any feedback you all have, let me hear it. But I think this is the best way to kind of learn from the past while jumping in and kind of having some fun with these future ones. All right. One more thing, obviously, if you're new to Underdog, don't know what I'm talking about with all this, you can still sign up for a new Underdog Fantasy account. Use promo code ETR. Still don't get up to that $100 in matched credit. You can also always find me on Twitter at Justin Herzig. Chat with me in the Jolly Jokers Discord. Lots going on. Let's take a look at last week. Okay. So love to hear how people did last week, what worked, what didn't. For us, I think the big kind of thing off the top was we had Justin Fields as the poster boy. If you look, on the cover boy for last week's stream, really saw like with his ADP being in that 35 plus range, it really made sense to kind of, hey, he has the upside. You don't need to worry about the stacking and stuff. And not surprisingly, yeah, he was in the top of all the lineups for the caching, putting up that 42 burger. And then you really had to hit the nuts to kind of win this. It looks like there was a three-way tie this week, all having the same lineup, but you needed that Fields, you needed that mix, and you needed that Devontae. As the week kind of went on, I started realizing that the way that I liked approaching these drafts, because stacking was so easy last week. You could get Hopkins at any time in the first round or at the end of the first, early second. And then Kyler Murray was a third rounder. You also were able to, if you wanted to stack Justin Jefferson, you could get Kirk easily. If you wanted to stack Tyreek Hill, we had the Tyreek, the Waddle, and the Tua were all easy to stack. Really every stack except for Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs were very easy to get. And so in that situation, yes, I normally love stacking, but I realized that I wasn't really gaining any uniqueness or leverage on the field because everyone else was so easily stacking as well, that I started shifting my strategy the week went on and going with more of these, hey, let me draft 2 elite wide receivers to start the week. And I think it's something that I'm going to be using heavily this week as well, and we can get into. But that top 4 or 5 group of wide receivers really just has a floor projected ceiling that I think just kind of puts them in a substantial tier above the rest of the wide receivers, while the running backs, and hey, maybe this was just a 1-week thing because last week we didn't have McCaffrey in the main slate. We didn't have Saquon on the main slate. Didn't have Henry with a good matchup or anything like that on the main slate. So maybe it's a week by week, but I think especially for that week and going forward, something I'm looking for is, doesn't make sense to kind of start off with 2 of these just elite wide receivers. And if you looked at last week, almost all the elite guys really had at least 20 plus points. So Tyreek 23, Devontae 31. I think Cooper Kupp was 22. I think Justin Jefferson was around that 22 area as well. And so if you were able to really hit on those 2 wide receivers, the next question is, okay, what do I do with my next draft picks? Well, running backs. In that game, in that week, you really had Joe Mixon, Ramondre Stevenson, Dalvin Cook were all in that 3rd to 4th round area where you could get those without, having to get crazy lucky or anything like that. So it's very simple to do this kind of, hey, wide receiver, running back. As you see here, he went Mixon, ATN. And then it leaves you with, okay, how do you end the last 2 rounds? For me personally, I think the largest edge that we saw in last week was the Foster Moreau, Darren Waller thing. If you were listening to this show last week, we touched on it a bunch. And I said, hey, this was enough of an edge for me to go ham. And I think I ended up with around 100 drafts, and 91% of those drafts had either Foster Moreau or Darren Waller. And then after swaps, obviously that went over to Foster Moreau. And why, what was it for me? If you looked at projections and such, and so with ETR, early in the week, we were actually projecting that Darren Waller was going to be out. And you saw Foster Moreau was actually the highest projected tight end on the slate for us. And a lot of that's because it was such an ugly slate. There was no Mark Andrews. There was no Travis Kelce. There was no George Kittle. I think the highest other player was Kyle Pitts. And so it was, hey, there's this opportunity where if Waller doesn't play, we're getting Foster Moreau, who was literally, his ADP was 36.0 in drafts until the Waller news came out that Waller wasn't playing. And Waller, on the other hand, his ADP was only like 35.8. It eventually rose up to about 35.6. Maybe it got to 35.5 until it was announced Saturday night that he wasn't going to be playing. So I'm drafting all this Waller, knowing that, hey, if Waller plays, I'm still getting a very low-owned player with substantial upside. And in the case that he doesn't play, which is what we kind of expected to happen, I'm getting Foster Moreau at virtually sub 1% ownership as the guy that we think is the highest, or at least very close, the highest projected tight end on the slate. And so that's why I felt comfortable just going absolute ham on it. Did it work out? No. I still think you run that game back. And yeah, Devontae probably doesn't have as big of the game as he had. Foster Moreau, I think, started off with about 3 targets on the first drive or 2, didn't pull any of those down for receptions. Later had that 30-yard one. Like, it could have been a lot bigger game. And obviously the salt in the wound of the fumble at the very last play of the game with the lateral ended up hurting him. But that's why I didn't end up making it into the top. Just ended up not having the right combo. So here's another one, fourth place. This one's in 4th place, but same idea here where the person went Justin Jefferson, Devontae. Then they went running back, Kenneth Walker, Joe Mixon, and then rounding out with their tight end and QB. For me, this was my highest points one, which was same idea. I got Tyree Cooper. I then went Mixon Cook, and then I went Fields Moreau. And because I knew that I could get the Waller Moreau with the last pick in every draft, and also Justin Fields, who has substantial upside on the ground, didn't need a stack partner with him. I had a bunch of drafts that actually had this exact format of wide receiver, running back, QB, Justin Fields, Foster Moreau. Unfortunately, Foster really tanked any of those. And I didn't have the right, I don't think it really had any that had the Fields, Mixon, Devontae that was necessary. So that's why my top one here was 158. Still ended up with, I think, a little positive value on the week, but got to obviously get the top to get there. Another one I had, which is similar, same idea here. I went Diggs Cup. Diggs is probably the only of the top wide receivers that really didn't get there. And then again, had the Mixon, had the Fields, had the Foster Moreau. But Ramondre and Diggs kind of tanked this one. So there's a little recap of what I was looking at last week, what you really needed to hit, and kind of what my process was. Love to hear does that make sense? Put it in the chats and such. Curious what, if that all makes sense. Okay, let's start taking a look at this week now, and let's jump in some battle royale drafts. So if you're a ETR subscriber, you can see that we have the latest Underdog Battle Royale rankings live and updated. Let me get a draft going here. Okay, we're hopping in. But yeah, so feel free, go to the ETR site. You can check out the Underdog Battle Royale ranks. For this week, I think the biggest question mark right now is probably around the Josh Allen, because in any other week, he would be number. Ooh, that's an interesting format. There we go. In any other week, Josh Allen would be the number 1 ADP, would be number 1 from projections. But with this injury, with the news that he may not play, it looks like he's been falling to about that 3rd round. And it's interesting, when you look at his ADP right now is at 17. What does that tell us? It tells us that, hey, people are drafting Stephon Diggs in the 2nd round. His ADP is 8, and then grabbing Josh Allen in that 3rd. And it makes sense where if you are going to tie yourself to Stephon Diggs in these, makes sense to kind of play for that stack with Josh Allen. And the expectation is, Stephon Diggs out. Stephon Diggs' ceiling is tied to if Josh Allen plays. I'm fine with taking some chances there. I'll continue to watch the news, and it's obviously it's another one of those reasons where, hey, there may be edge for if you do believe Josh Allen plays and kind of has that same healthy ceiling. Now is the time to be drafting, because you're not going to be getting him and Diggs in the 2nd and 3rd round later in the week if it comes out that he will play. And if you don't want to do that, if you want to wait, the other option is you'll see that, hey, If Josh Allen doesn't play, well, we've had a ton of people throughout this week already drafting him as a first, second, third rounder. They're going to have to swap to a substantially worse QB. So maybe there's some edge there in kind of playing that. So just a situation to continue to monitor at the QB. Other notes from a QB standpoint, Justin Fields has now moved up to QB2 in ADP on the week. Substantially different than obviously when we were getting him at near 35 point something ADP last week. So very, very low ownership there, but it is the absolute nut matchup. He's been fantastic the past 3 weeks. Let's see if we can pull this up. Yeah, 42, 26, 24, all getting down on the ground. His first two games this year, I think he only had 24 and 25 yards. After that, we've seen a substantial increase in those rushing yards. And so that's something that, hey, you're basically getting a touchdown of rushing on the floor just from him. And now we're going against Detroit, which is the Coors Field of football, not counting what happened to Rodgers last week. Okay. I think I'm going to be, thinking for this week. So I'm going to start with Cooper Kupp here. We have him as projected as actually the highest wide receiver, just barely above Tyreek Hill, but definitely a kind of tie between those. So we're going to draft Cooper. Got to start thinking about hey, who are we thinking about for stacks this week? Kelsey Mahomes is going to be a very difficult stack to achieve as Kelsey's going 1 overall with ADP, and Mahomes is clearly still in that kind of, end the first round. So if you can get that, obviously it's great. Otherwise, Fields, there's not going to be too much stacking here. He just doesn't need the Mooney, the Claypool, big game to get there. Maybe if you don't get Kelsey, I think Kmet is going to be an interesting one to stack with him because, hey, Kmet, 33.3 ADP. He does have 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. And so if you expect that large outcome from Fields, maybe Kmet gets there. You're not giving up substantial opportunity cost. All right, we have LAR. We could go with Hopkins here as the bring back. Devontae Jefferson. There's not really a strong argument for anything here. I'm going to just go with Devontae based off our projections. I'm sure that, hey, because of what happened last week, because of the way ADP is falling, this is going to be a very common build with people just grabbing these 2 wide receivers, especially because I think this week it's probably fair to say that you have Tyreek, Cooper, Devontae, Jefferson, Hopkins all in that top tier, and then Diggs as well if Josh Allen plays. So that's 5 or 6 right there. So lots of... It's going to be pretty easy to get 2 of the elite wide receivers. I think what will maybe be interesting and more unique is if you wanted to grab 3 of them, where you start off with whatever 2, and if you can have a Hopkins kind of fall to you. It does not work for us here, but I think that is going to be unique with high upside if people have that opportunity. All right, so we have our 2 wide receivers. We need to start thinking about what we're looking at from a stack. Devontae and Derek Carr is probably the first one that jumps out to me because Derek Carr is 35.9, barely being drafted. We don't think he's actually that much of a drop down below these others. So let's keep that in mind for later on, which means I won't want to grab Josh Jacobs. We can grab an Alvin Kamara. For tight ends this week, I do really like TJ Hawkinson and what they've shown, how much they want, the words they said they wanted to use him straight off the bat. He goes 9 for 9 for 70 yards. I think he's going to be a focal part. Yeah, they say key part. I think he's going to be a focal part of that offense going forward. So maybe Hawkinson is kind of a little tier of his own behind Kelsey and above the others, but really it's a crapshoot on tight ends behind this. I honestly think this is probably in play again. If no one's going to be drafting Waller, if no one's going to be drafting Moreau, it really, for me, leans that, hey, I'm going to keep doing it, and Waller's either going to play, or I'll just keep doing that swap to Moreau, which, again, we're going to have a strong projection on Foster Moreau if Darren Waller's not playing. So the way this draft is kind of playing out for me is I'm expecting to do a double stack with Derek Carr, Devontae, and that leaves the last running back for me. Let's see. Did Jonathan Taylor already go? No, he did not. Let's go with that full game stack here with Jonathan Taylor. So we're going big on that game. Yes, Jonathan Taylor looks like he did practice. I think there are signs that he will play. I'm not a huge Jonathan Taylor fan in this current offense, but when we're investing so much, if we're going to go with the Derek Carr, Devontae, and Waller or Moreau, we're going to need someone on Indianapolis to actually be putting up points. So let's say in this scenario that it's going to be Jonathan Taylor. And again, if Jonathan Taylor doesn't play early in the week, I have no problem grabbing the questionable guys, because we can then later on just go for a clear sub of, okay, whoever it is. And what? Phillip Lindsay was dropped today. Deion Jackson still has his injury issues. It's possible that come Sunday, Zach Moss is actually the starting running back for Indy this week, if no Jonathan Taylor, if no Deion Jackson. So something for us to at least keep in mind. And literally, you don't even see 36.0, meaning he hasn't been drafted at all this entire week. And I don't expect anybody should be drafting him. But it's something for us to keep in mind come swaps, and knowing that, hey, we have that in our back pockets. All right. Looking through some chat and stuff as this draft is just going to kind of play out. So real quick, from a strategy aspect, I mean, not expecting really anybody to be interested in these two, but we've got one QB here. Neither have tight ends. I'm going to grab Darren Waller first and just assume that Ripple Tiger is not going to grab a naked Derek Carr. Okay, we'll let this play out. So questions today. Not concerned about Kupp if Stafford is out. Let's see what the latest is on Stafford. I mean, I think, honestly, yeah, it would definitely. Okay, so still in concussion protocol. I think we believe he's going to play. If he doesn't, then we're looking at Wake Forest product, John Wolford, as his backup, who actually won the Rams a playoff game. Was it 2 years ago, I think? Yeah, I mean, he definitely takes a substantial hit if you don't have Stafford. But I still think, like, I'm still comfortable drafting him. Definitely someone we'll keep an eye on throughout the week and see how we want to adapt to that. All right, so for this one, we got our two wide receivers kind of at the top. We ended up going with our running backs, getting Alvin Kamara. And then as we have that major large game stack, Derek Carr, Devontae Adams, Darren Waller with the Jonathan Taylor bring back. Normally in these, I rarely ever do a double stack with a running back, wide receiver, and the QB, just because you really need to hit like the nut outcomes. And, you know, one game sample size, I think because this is not PPR, it is heavily on the touchdowns. You do really need to hit like all those touchdowns. Even to be honest, I don't often do a QB and two of his wide receivers for similar reason. And they just, you know, cannibalize each other a little. I am very content doing QB, wide receiver, tight end, especially when the tight end, as we said, is so ugly. Because outside of Kelsey, you're hoping, you know, in these drafts this week, if you don't get the number one pick or you don't get Kelsey, you're kind of just hoping that, one, Kelsey doesn't have his huge 100 yards, touchdown, 100 yards, 2 touchdown kind of game. And two, that the tight end that you do choose ends up getting you at least like 10, 11, 12 points. And I think there's just a major advantage of getting Kelsey this week, because you can still literally get Kelsey and get two of those. Okay, here we go. We're going to grab Kelsey here, and we'll see what this team ends up looking like. But going into it, my strategy with Kelsey will probably be, okay, I'll grab Kelsey. If Mahomes actually falls, obviously I'm going to go with the stack. If not, we're going to see which wide receivers are available. And Devontae's 10.7, so that's possible. Hopkins here is 14, that's possible. Waddle 13. You can still kind of finish with 2 elite wide receivers and Kelsey, and then figure out the rest from the, you know, running backs and QB. It just feels like a major edge. Okay. Any chance you can explain the mechanics of swapping on Underdog? Yes, of course. This is obvious. This continues to be one of the most confusing, and not your fault at all. Like it is a bit confusing. And I was actually talking to Rudman, our little, who's one of the product leads, kind of one of the big guys behind Underdog, about this earlier this morning. And the general idea is that there's one high-level swapping mechanism. And the way that it works is if you draft any player throughout the week and that player doesn't play, as long as when you drafted them, they weren't already doubtful or out, you will now have the opportunity for the system to automatically swap out that player that doesn't play for someone else. Now, how does the system decide who it's going to swap it out for? Well, it'll go directly off of your rankings. And if you're missing a running back, if Jonathan Taylor doesn't play, it'll look and see in your rankings who's the highest projected running back to replace him with. And it'll automatically do that. If you do not create your own rankings, then it'll go directly off of the ADP and pick the highest projected ADP player to replace him. There's one qualifier that I think is important to note is that if this player is a 4 o'clock game and they're not, if it's a 4 o'clock game, when they swap, they will only be able to be swapped by other people that have that 4 o'clock game. So be careful with that where you think, okay, I'm going to swap a guy in the 4 o'clock to a 1 o'clock. Well, no, it won't do the automatic swap until later on once that 4 o'clock player's game starts. Okay, so I'll finish on that. Okay, so we have Hopkins here. We like this. Kelsey, Hopkins. Let's take a look. We have ETN pretty low in the ADP. I think, and the main reason is it's not that we don't like ETN. It's just a lot of the running backs are really grouped together this week. And so I might grab ETN here to get the kind of mini stack with Travis Kelce. I think some of the issue with ETN as well is he's just not catching that many balls. And so in a game at Kansas City, you expect Kansas City to be winning. ETN may not get the level of volume that we've seen in the past. So I think that's why relatively at ETR, we're a little lower on him. But I'm okay with taking a chance here. And if there was one of those other elite wide receivers, I probably would have taken them. But in this situation, I mean, love Amon-Ra, love the volume that he's getting. But I think I'm going to go with the game stack, the mini stack aspect with the ETN and ETN and Travis Kelce for this one. All right. So to put a bow on the swapping. So what I'm looking for is a player who is questionable, who, if they play, I think will have like a strong outcome, a strong projection. And Jonathan Taylor, Darren Waller are good examples, knowing that if they do not play, I'm then going to be able to use my rankings to have the system automatically swap in a replacement player. And I'm then going to have Sunday morning to decide who those replacement players are, like how my rankings are set up. And what's so great about that is people drafting throughout the week aren't going to have the same injury news, the same knowledge, same information around what players have been drafted that I will have and that we'll all have Sunday morning. So Sunday morning comes and we can see that, hey, Zach Moss is actually going to be the starting running back for the Colts because both Deion Jackson and Jonathan Taylor are out. Well, that's information that everyone else that has already drafted hasn't had. So the only people who now have access to this are the people who have a swap. So what's going to happen is I'm going to put him at the top of my ranks and say, okay, I'm taking Zach Moss. And yeah, like Zach Moss isn't sexy or anything like that. And maybe there's, other examples you're more excited about. But the thing is, you're now getting a Zach Moss that is probably sub 1% owned in this entire contest. And in the outcome that he has a ceiling ridiculous game, you're getting direct access to that with, think of it as a DFS GPP at extremely, extremely low ownership. Okay, we're coming back around here. We've got our ETN Kelce mini stack. We've got our Hopkins. Kyler is the first one that really jumps out to me with regards to getting Hopkins. If we can draft, if we can get Kyler to fall to us past the Big Lebowski here, we'll grab him. After that, let's see. Ertz is down here, so we could go with the double stack for the Hopkins and Ertz. I don't hate it. I don't love it. Let's see. And then from a thing with the Rams is I don't think we're going to really have a Ram as a bring back without Cooper Kupp. Is there other tight end that we really like in this situation? One thing I'll note is that Taysom Hill is someone that I'm really targeting this week. We know about his upside. We saw the 30-point game. We know that he still has that possibility of playing as a quarterback. For me, it just comes down to whether or not I'm getting kind of leverage on the field when drafting Taysom, and when he was going in like the late 20s ADP, it wasn't worth it for me because now I'm just not getting the leverage here at 35. I think it could be worth it. So I think in this instance, let's actually grab Dameon Pierce. We're going to grab Dameon Pierce just as a lone one. Maybe Ertz falls back to us. If he doesn't, I still feel comfortable with this Taysom as my later round. And one thing to note, though, is we have Kyler and Hopkins, which is a chalky stack. ETN as the bring back to Kelsey. I completely forgot we had Kelsey. We do not need Ertz or Taysom in this build. I should zoom out a little so I can see the entire lineup. Completely forgot we drafted Kelsey here. Okay, so we just need another wide receiver. Glad that last second we grabbed the Tamian. That would have been a very unique build with Ertz and Kelsey, and I think limiting our upside. So now it comes down to which wide receiver do we want. My thinking through this right now is that, so we have the Kyler Hopkins chalk stack. We have Kelsey, ETN, maybe not the most unique because you're getting that mini stack and the ADP kind of falls pretty well. And Dameon Pierce is drafted in 22. So in this situation, I'm really going to want to go off the board with who I choose, meaning I want to get someone that's unique. I want to get someone that is not being drafted. For me, the first name that jumps out to me is Rondale Moore. I know his ADP is at 35.8 here, so very, very low ownership. If I look to see it, I believe 35.8 means that he's being drafted in around 5% of drafts, so very low. And what we've seen out of Rondale Moore the last couple of weeks, we love. He's playing more out of the slot. He's earning more targets. It's a combination of Marquise Brown going down, but also the new role we're seeing out of him. I mean, look at this last 2 games, 8 targets, 10 targets. Does have this hand injury. I'm not sure. I don't know too much about this. Moore's limited by hand injury at Wednesday's walkthrough. I'm okay with it because if he doesn't play, we're then just going to go and grab another very, very low-owned player. Christian Kirk, we already have ETN, so we're not looking at that one. I like Rondale Moore for what we're looking at because it's a combination of I want the very low owned. And I just mentioned I usually don't love doing the 2 wide receivers because I think it does limit some of your upside. But when we are already looking bottom of the barrel, if I'm comparing the Rondale Moore to these others in this situation, I'm going to just go with, Kyler Murray has that really large passing game. The amount of targets he's getting, just got to turn give me 70 and a touchdown, 80 and a touchdown. I think that could be enough. All right, we'll take that there. Okay, let's do one more. We'll have some fun. One other thing that I kind of want to talk about is, so I was on a stream yesterday with the Badge Bros, which are some more people doing some Underdog content. And one of the things that they were showing me is this training camp tournament. This is far more it is literally a double up versus the original kind of, the traditional tournaments that we're looking at. And so, $5 to play, a little less than half, end up doubling their money. I think it's really interesting because the strategy elements that we're using in Battle Royale are extremely different. It's far more like a DFS cash where it's just going off of your projections. One thing I'm going to be looking at is potentially doing some auto drafts on this and just straight up using what my rankings are and then just kind of seeing how those play out, because I can't think of a strong reason for why a stack gives you substantial edge over others when it is just pure a 50-50. And so I think kind of projections, or at least, projections really are the most important thing there. The one note is the swap component does get a little tricky because let me jump into a draft as I'm talking. But the swap component with the training camp is, if I draft Jonathan Taylor and he doesn't play in the Battle Royales, I really want to find that low-owned, high upside player. And that's where I might be willing to grab Zach Moss, even if he hasn't projected that well, but I know I'm getting him at 1% owned. in that training camp that is just a double up, I would much rather just replace him with whoever the highest other best projected player is. And I think right now, with the current swap functionality, we are unable to kind of customize what I want for this contest versus this. But this is what Redmond and I were talking about earlier today. So hopefully that maybe in the future, this is something that can they can add more functionality. All right, looking at Greg's question here, how big of a hit do you think Buffalo guys take if Allen sits? Usually impossible to grab an Allen Diggs-Davis double, so is it worth the risk? So 2 questions there. First, how big of a hit? I think a substantial hit. I mean, Case Keenum is a competent, probably above average backup quarterback, but no question the value for Diggs and Davis come from Josh Allen, come from the entire offense. I think Gabe Davis actually takes a substantially higher hit than Stephon Diggs, because the way that Gabe Davis is really winning is just kind of those electric big plays, and that level of the level of timing, the level of connection with Josh Allen, I think is so important. And I'm not sure like if we can expect that from Case Keenum. Okay. Here we are. We're back with a Cooper Kupp. Let's do it again. Let's grab Cooper. Never going to complain about Cooper Kupp, especially, a concussion is also one of those things where, it's going to be black or white. He's either play, he's not going to play. As long as he's able to play, then we're going to get like 100% Matthew Stafford. It's not like there's a shoulder injury, and if he plays, we're going to be getting a lesser degree there. And then so your other part is like usually impossible to grab that. Yeah, the Allen Diggs-Davis double, so is it worth the risk? And I think my lean is that Josh Allen doesn't play this week. That said, I think like there still is substantial upside for if it happens to get that. And in that stream that I mentioned yesterday, we actually drafted a Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis double stack. Because I agree with you. Like, if he's able to play, what are we doing here? Cooper Kupp, we could go Diggs, we could go Hopkins. I think we did Devontae last time. Let's go with Hopkins this time to get the LAR ARI mini stack. Maybe we'll go Kyler again. We'll see how the rest of the draft falls to us. I think we're playing for upside here. The first place is, I think they slightly changed it. So now instead of 50,000, I think first place is 35,000. Like, we have to accept, just like, hey, we're thinking best ball, we're thinking GPP. We have to draft like we're right. And maybe 70%, Allen's not going to play. But 30% of the time, you now have teams that are getting Allen and Diggs stacks and potentially an Allen Diggs-Davis double stack. And those are the risks that we want to take. So in this, I would say, I'm trying to compete against my bias where I think he doesn't play, but like still understand like, hey, there is substantial upside. And so I think because I wanted to get this mini stack, but maybe it would make sense to grab the Diggs, and then we would have grabbed Josh Allen. Wouldn't have grabbed Gabe Davis because we already have 2 here. But again, like that's something that's worth considering. Okay, I'm going to queue up Kyler here, especially because we have both of these. I think it's that much more important to make sure you get the QB for your game stack, and we really don't want to touch Matthew Stafford. So I'm going to put Kyler in the queue there. Taking a look at the others. Hi, Diggs just fell. So if Diggs was going to fall to us there, I 100% would have taken him. Had a very unique Cooper Kupp, Hopkins, Diggs, with a possibility of getting Josh Allen there. That would have been extremely fun and strong reason to go for it. Where we are, let's grab Josh Jacobs for now. We didn't grab Devontae, so I'm not too worried about Josh Jacobs. And this is a much better matchup. I think they're back at home, which is nice. We've seen for Josh Jacobs that he's not getting the pass down work that we saw in those that run of 3-4 huge games. But if it's against Indy, a team they should be able to beat at home, I think that Josh Jacobs could have another a big game like we were seeing before. All right, coming back around. Let's see. Don't see any mini stack things that I'm looking at for tight end. Could go with the Kyler Ertz Cooper Cup. It's probably a consideration here. I'm going to put Taysom in the queue as well as a possibility. My focus is it's more important for me to make sure that we get Kyler than Ertz, because if you grab Ertz but you lose Kyler, well, now you're getting the double stack without the QB. And even if they both go off, well, that means Kyler probably also went off and you're missing out. So I'm going to grab the Kyler there. We'll have the, if Ertz falls back to us, I think that's probably our next pick. And now we're going with that big game stack of the, hey, Kyler, Hopkins, Ertz with the Cooper Cup bring back. If he doesn't, we've got Taysom still in the back pocket. From a running back, it's probably going to be a one-off situation here. Looking at, so again, these are ETR's ranks that I uploaded in, and we can see who we're kind of high on with relative to the ADP. I think Aaron Jones is probably one of those worth drafting now, because if he plays, he can still be such a key focal part of that offense. If he doesn't play, we got the Q tag, so we can still get that swap later on, and no major concerns there. And yeah, we're getting the 35.3. So I think 35.3 means that we're seeing around 15 to 20% of the time he's being drafted. That's a pretty strong. Now that will likely increase as the week goes on, as he practiced Wednesday, assuming he keeps practicing and we don't have any, any negative reports about that injury. My expectation is that ADP goes down and he is drafted more, but that's okay. I still like him where we're getting him from value standpoint. Okay. Also taking a look to see from a positional standpoint if there's anything that we should be thinking through. So, for example, one note is Jordy and Old Man Game. Neither of those are able to grab a running back. Jordy already has 2, so he's maxed out, and Old Man Game already has his flex spot filled with the extra wide receiver. So normally I would say, so if I was considering, maybe I grab a running back here instead, I'm 100% going to grab my tight end first, because I know there's no chance of them scooping a running back. So and especially both need a tight end, let me grab Ertz. And now with the last pick, I know that I'm guaranteed to get my choice of running back. So we'll get Aaron Jones, and we'll finish this draft with the full game stack of Kyler, Hopkins, Ertz, Cooper Cup bringing it back, Josh Jacobs as a one-off, and Aaron Jones as a fellow one-off. Okay. I think that's kind of wrap it for today. Would love to kind of hear from everyone if this kind of format works, if you think there's value in kind of taking that peek backwards at last week. I'll continue to kind of do that going forward, as I do think it helps just from a structure, from a strategy wise, for people to kind of look back on what did work, what didn't, and how we can kind of, take those learnings. Because I do think those wide receiver, knowing that that double wide receiver, double running back build, when you have someone like Justin Fields who has that rushing upside so late, hindsight, it just makes so much sense. And I think this week you don't have that Fields with that rushing upside so late. Don't really have much here, so it doesn't work as much, but I still think the 2 wide receiver strategy is important for this week. All right. Going to finish it off. Grab that Aaron Jones. I feel pretty good about these teams that we did. So thank you for joining us. Please definitely leave a comment on the YouTube, but let us know that you continue to enjoy the structure. If you have any additional questions, put them in there or reach out to me on Twitter at Justin Herzig. And I'll continue pumping these out, continue to do these. You can find the rankings, obviously, on the ETR site. And other than that, I will see you all next week. Have a great Thursday. Have a great weekend. Later.